Hello, Internet. I hope you remember me. My name's Phil. I got Simon with me. We are the Camera Dads. Welcome back. I think it has only been 3 weeks.
Has it been 3 weeks?
Our last episode, since our,
Awesome.
what did we call it? Episode 1 of season 2.
Awesome, man. We're doing great. If it's only been 3 weeks, we're off to a great start for season 2.
I know. How you doing, Simon?
You know what, Phil? I'm doing great. Been got some good chances to use my camera recently, and I made some good chances to use my camera recently, and got some cool photos of some different things, and having a good time. The weather is still really warm here, but that's okay. Normally in the fall, we would get like butterflies coming through, and the monarch migration would be happening. Haven't seen as many this year, but maybe they're just waiting until it cools up a little bit. So
They're waiting for when we come down and visit you in a couple of weeks.
okay, good. Their timing is the right timing then. So that's what I've been up to. How about you?
Um, uh, Way more sports photography than I have ever done in my life, and
Interesting.
and a lot of snail photography.
Okay.
But we might save that for a different day. For anyone
I,
who's new, first of all, welcome and thank you for hanging out. So I think we mentioned last time that you and I live about 400 miles apart. I'm in Nebraska, eastern Nebraska, and you're down in
I'm in
near
Oklahoma.
Oklahoma. Um, and so I know we don't see each other too often, but typically in the fall, we'll make the trip down there. And you have two kids that are about the same age as my three, close enough that they can just hang out, be cousins. And you and I and our wives can just sit around and play cards and talk cameras. And we have that trip coming up in a couple of weeks. So I'm very excited about that.
I am too.
I have a
always
lot of
love when
things
you
that
guys
I've been
come
building
visit.
up for a while that I would love to show you in person, and then hopefully
Cool.
we can talk about them on here afterwards. But
Cool. Yeah, I'm
um,
I'm looking forward to it. Phil, I always find that when you come visit, I end up taking some interesting photos and learning from a couple things you've been trying, and then just getting to talk shop a little bit, among other things too. Like Phil and I have a lot of things to talk about besides cameras, but um, that's what the podcast is about. So that's what we're talking about here. And Phil, you kind of teased it a little bit here, the sports photography. Um, that's kind of what we're going to be talking about tonight is Phil's journey into sports photography. So that's kind of the general broad topic. And I think this might mirror what a lot of other camera parents would be experiencing or might be thinking about. And hopefully this might help hearing what Phil's been up to the past couple of years might inspire someone else to do this type of photography on your own. So anyway,
I
that's
hope
kind of
so.
the general idea. So,
Yeah, thank you.
so Phil,
Yeah, it's kind of funny because you and I grew up with very little sports in the family. Uh,
yeah, I told tonight at dinner we were talking about so my son is running cross country for the second year. And I told the boys that I was on the academic decathlon team, and they didn't believe it was real. They were like, "Dad, you made that up." And I said, "No,
it's
I
it sounds made up.
yeah." And they were like, "But no, no, seriously, Dad." Like they didn't believe me, and they really did ask. They're like, "No, seriously, what did you do in high school?" I was like, "No, I'm being serious. Academic decathlon and quiz bowl. That was the extent of my sports." So,
Yeah, and we had a croquet set in our backyard, and we
mhm.
played croquet and kickball, and that. Seriously, that was about it.
Yeah.
So I say that because it's very interesting being the father of someone who is so into sports. So my oldest is 14. He'll be 15 in about 2 months, and his whole life he's been playing soccer, basketball, baseball, football, and it's just foreign. I don't know how else to put, like, I don't have a better word for that. It is foreign. And it's
It's a
given
different world than
me,
we grew up in.
yeah, yeah,
And dance too. I mean, to be fair, you have two daughters and they're into dance. which we never did that when we were kids either. So,
No,
uh,
we weren't, and I don't want to give a bad impression about our childhood by any means. It was fantastic.
yeah, I had a great time.
But we just did sports, just like skipped us for whatever reason, and I'm fine with that. Like that's fine. I went
Yeah.
to total tangent. We went to the grocery store to pick up dinner from the deli yesterday, and the guy behind the counter was super into sports, and he's trying to talk to me about, what's my team and how are the Husker football team doing and all this stuff. And I'm just like, oh, come on, can we not do this? Because I can't talk to you. And so he goes to my son, and then he just starts just endlessly trying to get something, like asking him about what's your football team, what's your, how are they doing and all this stuff.
Uh-huh.
And I'm kind of listening, but I can also tell that my son's getting a little bit annoyed because this guy's talking so darn much. But we didn't grow up in that world.
Yeah.
But so it's very interesting, being the father of someone who is absolutely in that world.
Hmm.
And I credit his my father-in-law with a lot of that, because my wife's dad, um, they grew up in a much more sports heavy family than we did, and so he has a huge influence on my son as far as the sports goes. And I think that's where he gets a lot of that desire from, because he wouldn't get it from me naturally. So um, all that is to say, he's very interested in a lot of sports. He's been playing them his whole life, and that, as the camera dad, that's given me the chance to do a lot of learning, a lot of photography for one, and then just a lot of learning how the world of sports photography is different than anything else that I would have been into otherwise.
Yeah, I agree. I have my kids aren't as into sports as yours are. And I don't want to I don't want to sidetrack us too much, but I would agree broadly speaking with what you're saying about the sports that I have been fortunate to photograph that my kids do play. It has certainly been a learning experience, and I feel like I've learned a lot, not just about the aperture, ISO, shutter speed, composing, light, things like that, but also that world of sports photography. What that's it's different than the world of portrait or macro or art photography. It's a very different thing. Um, so Phil, like um, you didn't set out years ago to be a youth sports photographer, to my knowledge,
No,
right?
no, not at all. Yeah, I conned him into it. You know, I gave my son $5, and he's like, "I want you to play football so I can take pictures."
Uh,
No, it just that's how it happened. And I've been taking pictures of things for 30 years, and it's just that's what I really enjoy doing. And so this is
mhm.
him being in that world has really given me the chance to kind of mature and really grow as a sports youth. Like I said, I like that term, youth sports photographer. Um, I've purchased equipment specifically because of the sports photography,
Okay.
and that's something that I can't say I ever would have done before. Like before I got a DSLR, my first few cameras, I kind of had this pattern of just buy the one with the best zoom.
Okay. Yep. Yep. I know what you're going, or I know what you're saying. Yeah.
And that was, I don't want to make it sound like I was, naive, but I was. You just like I didn't know anything about ISO
Mhm.
and aperture, heck, even much about shutter speed. And so it was just like, how far can I zoom? That's what I want.
Yes, I remember that. I mean, it would have been over a decade ago, like probably 15, 20 years ago. I didn't know anything about cameras, and as far as I was concerned, the the quality of a camera, which that shows you how much I knew, the quality of a camera was how far it could zoom. I didn't even understand that the lens was separate from the camera. And if I saw a lens that was like had a maximum zoom of 250 millimeters and then one that was a maximum zoom of 400 millimeters, I didn't understand, like, why on earth would anybody ever get the zoom that's only 200 or 250? Like 400 is a bigger number, that's better. obviously that's a better lens. Why wouldn't you get that? And so, um, I've certainly learned a great deal over the years, as I know you have in this regard too. So that's interesting that what you just started by saying that's where you came from, was this idea that the farther a camera could zoom, the better it was.
Yeah, yeah, and it wasn't until, I think every photographer has probably gone through this exact same growth, right?
Mhm.
Where as a kid you like taking pictures, or a young adult, or whenever you get into it, and you just think that this is better than that, and so your next camera is this because it's better for some pretty simple reason. And
Mhm.
I didn't get a DSLR until probably maybe 15 years ago. Maybe it's not been that long. I'm not sure. Um, 12 to 15 years ago, probably. And huh, it's funny. It came with two lenses. It
This
came
is like,
with probably an 18 to 55
uh-huh.
kit lens and a
Isn't it like,
55 to 200.
yeah, that was like the Target Black Friday Nikon special,
Exactly.
right?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. And I was just over the moon. I was like, this is it. Look at these
Hmm.
lenses. And I didn't know at the time. They were fine. They're okay. They were good to get me started with something. But I bought my first lens purchase was a 35 millimeter prime lens. And I bought it because I needed something to help me take good short range indoor photos for my son's bowling party when he
Really?
was like 4 years old.
A bowling party.
Yeah.
So you bought a 5 millimeter prime lens, so
Yeah.
a non-zooming lens.
Non-zoom lens
Okay.
for, and I think you and I talked about this. You helped me understand, why that would be helpful. And at the time, I still didn't get it. I still had no idea what I was doing. It's funny
Why
because
would
I
you get a
remember
lens that
buying it. I
doesn't
bought it.
zoom?
I bought it at a local place called Rockbrook Camera,
Yeah.
and shout out to Rockbrook.
Yeah, they're great.
They, I was telling them what I was doing, and the clerk she said something like, "Yeah, just open that thing wide up, and it's going to be great for you." And I'm just kind of like, "Uh huh,
Yeah.
okay."
Sure,
I
I
don't
know
know
what
what
you're
you're
talking
saying.
about. Yeah, open it
I
wide, like,
literally don't know what you mean.
right.
Uh,
But
so
she was
yeah, that's
right.
like the first step into buying a lens for a particular reason.
Yeah.
And then this comes back to sports because a few years ago I bought a lens specifically to take um, better, longer range sports photos. So the sports that my son plays, and I keep saying my son because he's of the three kids, he's the one most into outdoor sports.
Hmm.
You mentioned I have two other daughters. Um, one plays, the youngest plays volleyball, and the middle child, she is all about dance, 100% dance. So that is an indoor thing, fixed lighting. That's a whole different ballgame. Pun not intended. Um,
Whoa.
but I want to talk, mostly about this outdoor sports experience. And so
Uh-huh.
a couple of years ago, I bought a 70 to 210 Tamron
Hmm.
f4,
Hmm.
and that has been my primary lens for shooting photography of my son playing, and it's mostly soccer. And now, I think I mentioned this last episode that he got on the high school football team.
And
So
he's a freshman this year, right?
he's a freshman. Yep.
Okay.
Yep. So I bought that lens specifically for taking photos of him and basically playing soccer and baseball, I guess, because it works really well for baseball too. And
Well, so it's interesting the thought process you've just described here, about getting your first camera, and then you had the kit lens, and then the kit zoom, the 55 to 250, and then you mentioned that you thought like those are really good lenses, and they are, but it sounds like what you uh, you started to kind of reframe your definition of what is good, because uh, if I'm hearing you right, it sounds like you started to look at what is good for Phil and what is good for Phil's goals in creating images. And that's a something that took me a while to learn. I thought there was just a ladder for
Hmm.
every single photographer, and like the kit lens is at the bottom of it, and there's some holy grail at the top, and the goal is to climb that ladder. And um, I didn't understand that it's all about what kind of photos do you want to take, whoever you are, and looking at the gear that will help you accomplish that. Because a lot of there's this saying like, "Oh, the best camera you have is the one you have with you," which is true to some extent. But if your son is across the field playing football, you cannot get a good picture of him if you don't have the right gear. It is physically impossible. And you can't pinch and zoom on your mobile phone and expect that to be the quality of picture that you would want with a really good wide aperture zoom lens. And so, to someone listening to this and thinking about, well, uh, this is what I need to get. Like I need a 35 millimeter prime, and then I need a 70 to 210 f4. Like no,
No, no.
what you need is to figure out what kind of photos you want to take of your kids or whatever you might be taking photos of, and then look at, well, what if that's my goal? What gaps exist between either my skills or and my knowledge of photography, or maybe there's a gap in the gear, and that could be filled by a 35 millimeter prime, or maybe it is a totally different type of, maybe a different type of camera altogether, to get you to those goals. So that's my understanding of what you've just explained, Phil. Is that like more or less accurate?
Yeah, I'd say so.
Okay.
And I hope we both kind of said, no, don't get it. I hope that didn't come off too harshly because those, if that type of lens will fit what you're after, then yeah, you should
Mhm.
explore it. And I think that definitely describes kind of the experience that I've gone through, and having having him be so into sports has pushed me to want to be a better photographer of him doing those things. And I think we talked about this last time, where you hit, as a growing photographer, you hit these sort of artificial barriers, and then you want to find out what might be the next thing. And I had a very distinct barrier with that 55 to 200 millimeter lens, the kit lens that came with my camera, and using it to try to take photos of uh, baseball, soccer, that kind of thing.
Mhm.
Because, and at the time, I didn't know enough about some of the fundamental principles of photography, like aperture, like ISO, and I still don't. I mean, I'm still learning. Um,
We all are.
but I'd take that 55 to 200 millimeter lens, zoom in all the way, and in the moment, I think I'm getting great photos. But then as soon as I look at them a little more closely, I realize that they're not that great. They're not very sharp.
I
Um,
remember this, Phil.
it's like you zoom in full resolution, and you have
Hmm.
a blurry, not out of focus face or body, but you have a not clear.
Yeah.
I don't know
I,
what the word,
it's like not
for that
sharp.
kind of.
It's not, it's not well defined.
Yeah.
And as you're saying this, I remember you showing me before you got that 70 to 200 to 210. I remember you showing me some of your pictures, and you were asking me, because this was years ago, probably even before pandemic. I remember you asking me like, what can I do to get these photos to look how I want them to look? And we were talking about this lens you had that um, the numbers were good. It says 250 or 200 or
Yeah.
whatever, and the implicit assumption then was, well, it can zoom in really far. What am I doing wrong?
And that takes you
Um,
back. That takes you all the way back to the beginning of this conversation. I'm sorry. Oh, let me just get the camera with the farther zoom.
exactly.
For
Yeah, yeah,
wait,
yeah.
15 years ago, like, oh yeah, just a zoomy. The
Hmm.
more zoom equals better.
Yep. Yep. That's not always the case. So you discovered then that there was a limitation, that you the we I think you and I together, like through these conversations years ago, discovered that the maybe you did need a different lens to get the types of photos that you were not that you wanted to get, but it was just not working out.
Yeah, this is a very it's very interesting because I haven't thought about this in a long time, but it really does fit that description of our last episode of that barrier that you run into.
Hmm.
And the more I think about this, that was definitively a something that I could not get past with the gear that I had. I couldn't use that 55 to 200 millimeter kit lens to get better results. Maybe a little bit if I learn a little bit more about my ISO or my exposure and things like that. But I would not get, I'll go out on a limb and say like magazine quality, Sports Illustrated
That's
cover
fair.
quality photos,
Sure.
which sometimes I absolutely do not consider myself that kind of photographer, but sometimes I'll look at one of my photos and just stop for a second and be like, damn, that's a really good photo.
I will do the same with your
So
photos as well,
it
Phil.
happens like, wow, I took that shot.
Uh-huh.
That didn't happen at all with the 55 to 200 that I was bumping up against the limits of. And so, yeah, you and I talked for quite a long time, and I did a lot of research on what to get. And this, I don't know how technical you want to get
Yeah,
because a lot of this
go
I
ahead.
still don't even understand. But the lens that I have now is f4
Hmm.
along the entire length of the zoom.
Yes.
What's is that? That's not fixed. Is that called a fixed aperture? I'm not sure.
Um, well, so the one thing to anyone listening who has a similar kit lens, like a 55 to 200 zoom, or the even the 18 to 55, um, the construction of those lenses is such that when you're zoomed out, you'll have a maximum aperture of say 3.5 f3.5, but when you're zoomed in, the maximum aperture will be significantly smaller,
Mm-hmm.
like f 5.6 or 6.3, which is pretty common on some of those long zooms. And so there's a couple things working against you. Number one, when you're zoomed all the way in, it's not letting in as much light. But number two is the quality of the glass inside the lens is usually not as high. And so when you're zoomed all the way in, you have to either use a higher ISO or a longer shutter speed to let in enough light. And neither one of those are what you want to do for sports photography. But then also the sharpness of the image is often dictated by the quality of the glass inside the lens. And it's it's just not the same. It's almost like when you go to the store and you buy like the great value brand mac and cheese. The the raw elements might seem the same, but it just doesn't taste the same as the name brand mac and cheese. And there are some things that do taste kind of the same, but there are some things that do not. And mac and cheese, because we buy mac and cheese, um, I got kids. The off brand just in it doesn't taste as good. Like the ingredients aren't there. And it's the same for a lot of camera lenses. The cheaper ones, in order to make it cheaper, something has to give. And often the quality of the glass is not the same as some of the higher end, more expensive lenses. And so your Tamron f4, it can maintain an f4 aperture throughout the entire range. And this is, I'm not telling you, Phil, like I'm telling the casual listener, which means that the construction is a cut above a normal kit lens that you might find in a package deal, like a Black Friday package deal. Um, and it's a little on a comparing it to that original 55 to 200, at the wide end, it's f4, which actually is a little smaller, but it can maintain that f4 throughout the entire zoom range. And so you never have to worry about, well, if I zoom all the way in, what's my light trade-off? There is no light trade-off.
Exactly. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's the key for that.
And I don't often use it at the widest. What is it?
Mhm. I think
70.
yeah, I think
70.
it's 70.
70 millimeters is the widest. And I don't often use it. And when I do, it still is fine.
Yeah.
It's like you said, it's f4 there, whereas I could do a little bit better with something. But that in Jurassic Park,
All things go back to Jurassic Park, don't they?
um, are they heavy?
Yes.
Then they're expensive. Put them back. He's talking about the night vision goggles.
Uh-huh.
That's There's a lot more glass in that Tamron or a similar lens. Nikon, a
Mhm.
bunch of people make them. I just bought the Tamron. There's a lot more glass in there. It's a much physically larger lens, even though it zooms the same distance as the other one. The
Mhm.
other one's a 55 to 200. This is a 70 to 210. It's
Yeah.
effectively very, very similar on that range. But there is a heft to the
Yeah.
Tamron
Yeah.
and similar. And without knowing what I'm talking about, I'm going to assume that has to do with the the necessary size of the glass to make that happen,
It's
and
not
also
necessarily,
just
a lot of it has to do with the amount of glass. So you'll see on a lot of lens diagrams, it'll say like 14 elements in 9 groups.
yeah.
And there's simply more glass. There's like literally more glass lenses inside that big lens
Mm-hmm.
to focus the light and to manipulate that light. And so you get the it is heavier. Also, it has different quality construction. Like it's not all plastic. There's probably some plastic elements, but there's some
Yeah.
metal elements to it as well.
And you said earlier just the quality of the glass on
Mhm.
the sort of Black Friday lenses. And I don't want to sound like we're talking bad about those lenses, because I used them for years and was very happy with them for a long time until I needed to grow.
Mhm.
Uh, that was one key difference, I think, is just the quality of the glass for what I really wanted to get versus what the thing that I owned was capable of giving me.
So I want to say one more thing about this, and then I have another question for you, Phil. So we move away from the lens, and into like I have a question about technique. And Nikon came out with a fixed aperture or a fixed focal length prime lens for wildlife photographers. It was something like a 600 millimeter or something. It was crazy. And there was a limitation in that the front end, the piece of glass that sits on the very front end was like had a special fluorine coating or something. And Nikon had to grow these crystals in a lab to make the lens. And that was the limitation. These lenses were back ordered for months and months because Nikon had to actually grow the crystals in the labs to make the lenses. They couldn't just go and put in an order for these special lenses from Corning or someone. They had to, the glass was such a high level of quality that was the constraint, that the physically making these glass elements. And so it's a real thing. Like this is not just some pie in the sky thing. It is a real thing. Um, but so you got better glass.
Mm-hmm.
Eventually you like even got a better camera. Um, but now you're to the point where, I mean, I've seen your photos of your kids' football games. Can you tell me about like how you got to this point where you're basically the team photographer?
Yeah,
I mean,
which was
which rewind 5 years, and if you would have said, "Hey, Phil, in 2024 is going to be like the high school will
oh
be
man.
asking him to be the team photographer," I don't, I would have had a tough time believing that
Oh,
because
me too. Me too.
and I include myself in that too. Like,
one one of the one of the um parent representatives for the high school football team. Um, Her son and my son, they're friends. We've known them for a couple of years. Um, so she knows, I think mostly from baseball, that I really enjoy doing photography of his games. And so she has some kind of representation at the high school. And she asked my wife and I if we would be interested, because she knows that we do all these photos, if we'd be interested in basically being the team photographer for the high school football team. And I honestly didn't know what to think at first. Uh, I don't know how to quantify that. You know, you as a kid or even as a young budding photographer, like I said, even 5 years ago, picture myself being at a high school football game for whatever reason and watching, and then there's that guy down on the field, and he's standing down there on the sidelines with this huge honking lens,
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, oh man, look at that. I'll text you pictures sometimes if we go to the local baseball team games and
Yeah.
I see one of their photographers out there. I'll grab a shot and send it to you. Like, this guy's got a
Right. It's some
huge piece of glass.
massive.
And it's like, and that's exactly that. That's, I think, oh, I would never be that guy.
Mhm.
There's no way. Uh, but now I kind of am.
So how did you, or not how did you, but what do you do to get good photos then of your child playing football and other kids too? Like, so if someone out there is listening and thinking like, I want to do that and I've got a decent zoom lens and a decent camera, what do you do to make that happen?
I mean, if you wanted to do that, even just for practice, I mean, I would just, or just for fun, I would just ask, you know, um, ask the coach, ask the school, or just heck, you could just show up at a game and get a ticket to a football game, and as long as no one's really, as long as you're not being a bother, you could probably just go down to the sidelines and take some photos. But the number one thing that I would suggest is, if you want to do that, is get permission somehow. Just
Good call.
because,
Yeah.
and that was one of the key things that I did. So when I was asked to do it, and the first time I did this, I pay my $5 to get in, and then I just find my way down to the field, and here I am standing on the sidelines of a high school football field, something I never even did in high school. And it keeps coming back to me like, um, wow, what am I doing? Like,
Uh-huh.
am I supposed to be here? Like, am I good enough for this? Like,
Uh-huh.
and it's like, well, hold on. Yeah, you are, because you were asked, and you're having a good time, and it's okay. It's fine. So I go down there, and now I'm just on the football field. And so I try to meet a coach or two and say, hey, I'm Phil. I'm father of one of the kids, and I'm here as the photographer for the football team. Where do you want me? Where can I go? Where can't I
Oh,
go?
that's good. Phil,
That
that's
was a
good.
key. One of the first
Where do you
questions
want me
I
to
asked.
stand?
Yeah, one
Yeah.
of the first questions I asked, because I think my primary rule, and this is not a rule that the school or the team has given me, it's mine, is that stay out of the way.
Phil,
Like,
that's a great piece of advice. I would have never, that didn't enter my mind as like a part of the calculation. But yeah, you're right. Stay out of the way because it's about the kids and the
yeah,
coaches and the game, not the guy with the camera.
no, not at all. Just be invisible. And you know, we could compare this to something that we're also, you and I are both familiar with, and that's just a parade, hometown parade.
Hmm.
One of the things we did do growing up was ride unicycles for fun.
Hey,
And
I still do
I
it.
know you still
We're
do.
gearing up for the
Uh,
homecoming parade in a month, me and my kids and my wife.
um, that's fizzled out of this household, and I'm okay with that. But so we grew up riding unicycles in parades. And if you're a photographer at a parade, you're going to be out there like in the street, and you're going to be walking around, walk around the floats and the attractions. And the attractions, like if you're on unicycles, you're going to wave at the photographer. You're going to give your attention to the
Yeah, yeah,
photographer.
sure.
But when I'm at a football game, I want to give 110% respect to the game and to the players and to the coaches and to the refs and be as invisible as I possibly can be.
It's a great idea.
It's just a fundamental principle that I'm gonna hold to, because I absolutely do not want to be an annoyance, a burden.
Yeah.
You know,
Well, and
I'm
that's
standing there not paying attention, and then the ref runs into me because the ref is trying to ref a play.
right.
No, I guess on that thought, I try very, very hard to be aware of all of my surroundings, especially what's to the side of me and to the behind me. And maybe
So
this sounds really strange,
no,
but
it's
I I try to have a constant awareness of what's around me, where I am while I'm walking down the sidelines, so that I know, okay, I'm safe. I can step backwards here. I can take some shots and get out of the way. Okay, the play went to the west, so I know the team is going to be coming at me. All the
mhm.
rest of the team who's on the side, they're going to be coming down here so they can switch players. I didn't know any of this 2 months ago.
Well, I mean, some of this is like counterintuitive because as when you are in a situation as a photographer, um, one of the things that you learn over time is to look for the light and look for where's the light coming from, and then how do you want the light to illuminate your subject, and do you want backlighting or not? And so much of taking good photos involves understanding light. And in your case, this it's actually not about the light. It's about you got to stay out of the way.
Mm-hmm.
And you can't be like wandering around the field at the 40-yard line, like in the middle of the field, looking for like where's the sun coming from? And I need the perfect shot because now you're in the way. And so your challenge then as a football photographer, or if there's other sports like soccer or what have you, you can't make the light and these other things your primary um uh um that can't be at the forefront of your mind. You have to first look at where does the coach want me to stand so I'm not in the way, and
Mm-hmm.
then work around those constraints. And that can be a challenge, but it's what you have to do. And that's a great piece of advice to any budding sports photographer, especially child sports photographer. That's a great idea. Just be invisible and
Yeah,
capture what you can given your constraints.
yeah. Like I said, I wasn't given that rule. It just seemed the appropriate thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it's worked out pretty well. Like the first game that I did, I stayed on the sidelines. I didn't go around to the behind the end
Mm-hmm.
zones at all. Um, I think I've photographed four-ish games now, and I've gotten much more comfortable down
Good,
there too.
good.
First thing is I need to make sure that I've got make sure you got permission to be there. If it's an away game, check in with the other school so they know who you are. And I've started to go around to both sides of the field so that I'm not just on our high school's side.
Mm-hmm.
There was one game where it was an evening game, not late, but maybe 5, 6 o'clock. So the sun is setting, starting to set. Our team side is on the east, but that means the opposing team, they're on the west, but that's where the light's coming from, is from the west.
Sure.
So for most of that, for at least half of that game, I was on the other side. I was doing exactly the same thing, being invisible, but I was among the enemy players,
Oh,
and they didn't care. It was
right.
exactly the same thing. I just stayed out of the way. I
Yeah.
practiced the same thing, but I was able to get really good shots because the sun was coming, in from that side.
Yeah.
And again, it's just a matter of I met the athletic director of that school. I talked with the coach of that team, and then afterwards, I thanked him. I said, "Hey, I got great shots over here because the way the sun was coming. I appreciate you letting me hang out on this side of the field." And it feels really good to have those conversations and to be, I don't know, to have that level of respect
Yeah, that is super
for
cool,
the
Phil.
people that are there.
Uh-huh.
I don't know.
Well, so let me ask you a couple questions, and we're running kind of long here.
Yeah, I don't want to run too long.
Let me ask you a couple questions that might be going through our listeners' mind, and honestly, my mind too. Um, how from like a meat and potatoes perspective, you're going in to take photos of uh, football game and soccer game. Um, what do you do about like shutter speed? What do you
Yeah,
do about ISO? These like basic things that are because sports is a really fast moving thing. So, how should someone know what to do about these basic exposure settings on their camera?
I'll start that answer by saying I don't know because
Okay.
I'm not a professional photographer, but I'm trying. I play one on TV. And so I always try to. So, what I've learned in the last year or so, I have spent a lot of time in manual mode
Okay.
on my camera. I think I have a D7200
Hmm.
and I keep it in manual mode most of the time for these. And I try to, if it's a sunny game, which most of them are, I typically have my ISO at 100 or 200 and I will lock it at that. And I'm not a fan of auto ISO
Okay.
unless it's getting dusk, and then I'll let the camera do what it needs to do. Um, I'm a bit of a control freak, so I want to have control over all of that, even though there are times where I definitely shouldn't, and I should let the camera do what it's going to do. So, but for the games that are morning, afternoon, I'll lock the ISO in at 100 or 200. Um, I always tend to go way too fast with my shutter for a while. So I'll like if I can shoot at 1/8,000th, I will. But I've learned over the last couple of weeks that most of the shots I'm getting, specifically at a football game, I can go down to 1/1000th and not have any motion blur.
Hmm.
Because that's the biggest concern for me with shutter speed is um, if there's some kind of an action shot, I don't want it to be blurry. But I've learned that what you're talking about the high school football game, most of the action that happens, a snap, a pass, a catch, a tackle, a touchdown, those things happen at a speed that you can capture at 1/1000th or
Hmm.
even a little bit slower. So I don't have to be as concerned about having my shutter speed. I'll get a little bit worried if I go down to a 2000th or a 1000th or an 800th or something. It's like, oh, these are going to be all blurry. They're not.
Hmm.
Most of them come out just fine.
Yeah, that's my
And that
experience
that
as well.
that eases my concern then because I keep the aperture at f4 no matter what, just to get as much light in as I possibly can, and that really helps with the bokeh, that background blur,
Yeah.
because the
Yeah.
the the players, I can get them tack sharp, but then the refs who are a few yards away behind them are in the background.
And that is the difference between that you mentioned a magazine quality photo and a mobile phone snapshot, where if you're up in the stands, if you're pinching and zooming, you're not getting that depth of field. You're not getting that the player is sharp, but the ref is out of focus. You're not getting that quality that you would see in a more higher end, more professional setting, and that can only happen if you have the right access, like you're talking about. If you're on the field versus on the stands, and if you know how to control your gear in such a way to use that wide aperture, to have a lens that is sharp even at wide open aperture, and to learn about the exposure and the elements of exposure like ISO, shutter speed, and aperture. So that's some good information, Phil.
I hope so.
It's interesting.
I,
You and I are actually like on we diverge on this. I do photo shoots for clients as well as just my kids. And I also do photos of my son's cross country meets, and I used to take photos when he played soccer. Um, I can't tell you the last time I didn't use auto ISO on anything like that.
Mhm.
The only time I control ISO manually is if it's in a highly controlled macro setting indoors and I want ISO 100 and nothing else. For me, um, I don't uh, I don't care what ISO my camera uses because I want the shutter speed to be a minimum of a thousandth of a second. And I always set my auto ISO base to 100, but then I let my camera go beyond that. So if the sun's going down and I want the photo to be at f4 or even f2.8, um, I want to know that if nothing else, motion has been frozen and the aperture has been used that I want it to use. And then I let my camera decide, oh, you know what, this calls for ISO 800 or 1600, because at least the motion was frozen. And it's just different approaches. Like everyone's got to figure out what works for them. Um, and ultimately, like clearly you have a technique that works. So it's sort of like that ladder we mentioned at the beginning. Um, these are, there's no one right way to do it, but I think there is the wrong way to do it is to barge on the field and not talk to the coaches.
Oh,
And
absolutely. Yeah.
the wrong way to do it is to make yourself the center of attention. Like that's the wrong way to do it. Beyond that, if if you shoot in manual and or if you shoot it with auto ISO, or even if you shoot full automatic, like if you turn
Oh
it to
yeah,
like
I've done that
green,
too. I've
yeah,
done that too.
yeah,
We had
like
man, we we should wrap this up because I don't want
mhm,
these episodes to go too long.
yeah.
Uh, I shot a game a week or so ago that was at dusk,
Hmm.
and I tried a lot of different things as it got darker and darker, and then the field lights came up, to get good shots,
Hmm.
and I could tell that I was struggling. I tried, the green auto, right? Just
Uh-huh.
let the camera do everything, and that was okay for a little bit. I tried, dropping my shutter speed down to like a 500, then go ahead, turn on auto ISO and that sort of thing. It was tough. I wasn't super happy with the results,
Hmm.
but again, it's all about learning and
Yeah.
just and growing. And I also wanted to mention, get out of the way, disappear, all of that, respect for the game and the
Hmm.
um, I've had very few instances where I will actually want the attention, but there are a couple,
Uh-huh.
and it's there's really only one actually, and it's after the game. Hopefully after a win. Sometimes I won't do this after a loss.
Uh-huh.
They'll have a huddle. They'll go to one of the goalposts and have a huddle for 5 minutes, and then they'll break and they'll all start coming back towards the bench to collect their stuff.
Oh, I think I
So
know where
I
you're going
will
with this.
intentionally position myself. You know that famous Game of Thrones scene where Jon Snow pulls his sword and he's standing there like this, and there's literally 60 horses galloping straight at him. Okay,
Sure.
it's look it up. Look it up.
Of course.
That's what I want to be after the game when they're all super happy
Ah, okay.
because I
Okay,
want that
cool.
team to be barreling towards me
Yeah,
so that
okay.
I can catch all their faces. And I will
Yeah.
just go, if you're watching the video, I will just look at them and go click, click, click. It's just looking back and forth, catching, okay, got his face, got that face,
Hmm.
got that face, got that face. And a lot of them will look at me or they'll do a high five with each other. So in that brief moment is the only time where I will basically make myself known.
That's good
Otherwise,
though.
yeah, it goes back to my fundamental principle of be invisible. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, let me share two other quick tips for anyone and who might be thinking about this. My first tip would be if you're doing sports photography, put your camera in what they call motor drive or continuous high speed shooting, because one of the best ways to get one great photo is to take a whole lot of photos. And um, if you're just taking one shot at a time, like click and then wait a minute or so and then click, you're lowering your chances of getting a really good photo. So take a lot of photos and just delete the ones you don't want. Because if you want some great shots, you're going to have to put up a lot of mediocre shots along the way. But that's how it goes. When you're a sports photographer, you end up taking a lot of pictures. And the other thing I would recommend, but again, Phil, I would, you might have a different thought on this, is use continuous autofocus rather than single point or what do they call it? The autofocus that's just, it focuses once and then it never changes again. If you're shooting a lot of motion, then you want that focus to continually be adjusting as the player moves. Now, a lot of cameras have a tracking built in, and I'm not saying use tracking. You can decide if you do or do not want to use, and that's where your camera automatically like moves the focus point around to track your subject. I'm saying put it in continuous autofocus so that when you focus on your subject and that subject then moves away or moves towards you, your camera will continuously refocus to adjust accordingly. But
so you push your shutter half down to grab focus, and the kid just moves left or right. You will see that little focus box follow them. Is that the tracking, or is that the continuous? Because we don't have to go down this road tonight. I mean,
well, and I don't use I use back button autofocus, which I guess that's a whole other topic. But now we're getting into the weeds. Like, Phil, I think you covered all of the big main points. So like for what you've learned as being your team photographer, how you got here over the past 15 years, I think your advice about the relationship element, meeting the coaches, meeting the athletic director, getting permission, because I can think of a couple of people I know who would just go down there and not get permission and wait for someone to tell them, hey, you can't be here. Those are the kind of things that are going to lead to success. And in fact, if you are the friendly guy who's asking permission, staying out of the way, that then heightens the perception of the end result. So even if your photos aren't perfect, at least people will have a positive impression of you, and then they will think your photos are good as a result. So those are that kind of thing is, I would say, equally important, if not more important, than all of the auto ISO, aperture, all that stuff. Like, that's important to figure out your technique. But what you said about getting permission and working the relationships, like, that is really critical. And I think that can't really be overstated how important that is.
Yeah.
So
this is fun. We should wrap it up,
Phil. Yeah, I agree.
Thank you for sharing. Fun chat.
Is really cool.
Fun chat. Again, for the listeners, I appreciate you being here. 2 episodes of season 2. We're going to keep this thing rolling. I like this.
Me too, Phil. We need like a sign-off phrase or slogan. I don't have
it's got to. Nope.
No. All right. Well, you know what? I'm going to stop the recording, and we will see you / viewers, listeners. We'll catch you next time.
That works.